And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
It's very simple. Memoir 44. When I play against someone else, Memoir 44, it's one of my number 10 games. There's only 10 games that I rank a number 10, and this is one of them. However, when you play it with the Overlord rules, then it becomes an 11. All the way up to an 11. Out of 10, a tremendously good game, and made even better. Now, interestingly enough, you don't actually need this expansion to play the Overlord scenario. In fact, all you need is 2 copies of the original game, which is what I've done for years. I've owned 2 copies of Memoir 44, put the boards next to each other, made one long board, and then instead of playing with 2 players, you can play with up to 8 players in the Overlord campaign. And we've done that for a while. You had to make a few modifications to work. Well, what this expansion does is it takes the whole thing and allows you to play with just one set if you want, or with both sets, and it adds a few things. Let's see what it adds. First of all, it comes with a ton of these components, which they call the poor man's units. In a sense, if you don't own 2 copies of the base game, and 2 copies of the Eastern expansion, and 2 copies of the Pacific expansion, you could still play with the extra units if you want to. In fact, at first I was like, I'm not going to ever use these. I don't need to. I have 2 copies of the original. I realized I don't have 2 copies of the Russian, so if I need extra Russian tanks, I could always use these pieces instead. That's a nice idea. It's still, it's so hard to use. I mean, let's just for comparison. Here's the 3 of the tank units, together, and then here's 3 of the German units. Here's 4 of the soldiers, and then we have 4 of the German soldiers. It's okay. I do like the fact that they may be a German soldier on one side, but on the other side, then it's a Japanese soldier. And then we also have, while I might have an American tank on one side, on the other side, it's a Russian tank. No British units, but again, I don't even know if there's any British Overlord scenarios at this point, but it's a nice idea. The major thing that this comes in this expansion are the complete Overlord rules and this deck of cards right here, the Overlord deck. Now, let's take a closer look at this deck because it's the basis of the game. Before I show you the cards, let me quickly explain how an Overlord game works. Instead of there being 1 player on each side, there's now 4. When you have in the original game, there's 3 sections to the battlefield, but when you put 2 boards together, there's now 6 sections. 3 people on each side become generals, each of 2 sections. So you have a left flank general, a right flank general, and a center general. These generals are all under charge of one commander-in-chief, who is behind the lines. He's the commander, the overlord, if you will. He draws a certain amount of cards, depending on how many players are playing the game, and each turn he'll give out 1, 2, or 3 of those cards. He can give 2 to one player, 1 to another, 1 to each player, 1 to one player, and none to the other 2. It's up to him, because at the end of the turn, after these cards are used and discarded, he's only going to be able to draw 2 cards back. Now, if a player does not get any orders from their commander-in-chief, they can still try and activate a unit by rolling a die. If they roll a soldier or a tank or a star, they can activate a unit of that type, or in the case of a star, a unit of their choice and use it. If they roll a grenade, though, they must take 1 figure off the board, and if they roll a flag, they must retreat 1 of their units. So that's kind of a gamble. You have a 2/3 chance of getting something good, but still, it's up to those generals. When the general hands out these cards, he gives basically when the commander gives the general the card, the general can decide what he does with it. The commander is allowed to communicate directly with one of his generals, but not all 3. So he has some control over what's going on, but when it comes down to the nitty-gritty details, the generals themselves play. Now, in times past, you simply took 2 decks of the regular Memoir 44 cards, which are fine, and put them together and used them, and there were some modifications that you had to make. This deck that comes in this game is 2 of these decks put together, but it's modified specifically for Overlord. The cards, it's really well done. The artwork's pretty much exactly the same, but there's a blue background and a red background. When there's a red background, it will show you exactly which general you're allowed to give it to. This can only go to the general in the left flank, and the blue cards are special ability cards. And I really like how everything was rewritten with the Overlord scenarios in mind. Now, sometimes it doesn't matter so much, but for example, here's the pincer move in the original game. Allows you to move 2 units, 1 on each of your flanks. Here, it's 2 units on either flank. You give it to either of the generals on either flank. The counterattack is the same card, but here it gives you a little bit more instructions for the Overlord, while their Finest Hour, a very good card in either scenario, has some major changes made to it when played in the Overlord scenario. The Overlord scenario is just an absolutely fascinating thing. Take a look here at a pre-printed map so that you don't need 2 boards put together, but look how just truly awesome it looks. While it's nice to be able to put 2 boards together and set up all kinds of scenarios, I really like these pre-printed maps. They allow you to put a whole ton of terrain on the board without actually having to put it there. It's already printed on the map, and you can set things up very quickly, which in an Overlord scenario is very nice since they do take a while to set up. But they look really neat. There's a ton of forces on the board, and they really have a kind of epic feel. Not to mention, working together with the other players is just tremendously fun. And even as you can see here, you just see this massive wall of German units ready to advance here on the American positions. And it's truly a ton of fun, and the whole thing will have people talking about it because it offers an experience. You worked with 3 other players to stop the evil Germans or to defeat the annoying American invaders, and it's fun beyond belief. I guess the $1 million question, or I guess in this case the $30 question is it worth getting this expansion? Well, I'll say yes, if you want to play the Overlord games, obviously. If you're not even interested in Overlord, then don't bother. You don't need this. But if you like playing Overlord and you say, well, I already have 2 sets, not only does this give you a good, concise rule set, but it does give you the deck of cards, which is specifically tailored for Overlord, and these extra units in case you run out of a certain nationality. If you only own 1 copy and you want to play Overlord, then this is a great way to get into it because this allows you to use those mega pre-printed maps that Days of Wonder is going to be putting out, and this allows you to jump right in with the deck of cards, with the extra units, and I think it's great. Really, if you've never played Overlord with Memoir, it's the best way to do it, by far. I love playing the 2-player game, but the Overlord are games that you'll talk about for ages, and that is the mark of a truly great game.
Thanks for joining us today. For more written, audio, and video reviews, as well as the #1 board game podcast, check out the website at www.thedicetower.com. Until then, this is Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.